Hi, everyone. We're excited to kick off ASNR's new series, Research Meets Reality, where we bring insights to timely topics, where ASNR analysts will share their perspectives, unique findings, and more. So today I'm joined by Derek Brink. He's our head of security research here at Aberdeen, and we have Sal Calta of Calta Consulting. They'll be giving a better breakdown of how to bridge the gap between technology enablers and business outcomes. Derek, let's start off with you. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about your background and who you are and your areas of expertise?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Brian. And hi, Sal, and everybody listening. Hi as well. It's Derek Brink here. I've been an analyst, a researcher here at Aberdeen for, more than 10 years now. And as Brian said, I do get to do research in pretty much all areas of cybersecurity and other areas a little bit outside there too, but that's my main wheelhouse. And before that, before an analyst, I was on the vendor side, uh, um, places like RSA Security, sometime with IBM and a couple of startups. And my roles there were mostly in product management, product marketing, and then corporate strategy. So in many ways, the analyst role, where we kind of try to do research about the buyers, people who are practitioners and the technologies they use. That's a lot like product management, and helping vendors to communicate with them. That's a lot like product marketing. So it's been a cool and comfortable role for me. But hi to everybody, and thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you, Derek. I'm glad to have you on the show today. And our second speaker is Sal Calta. Sal, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your interest in today's topic, bridging the
Yeah,
gap between
sure,
enablers and outcomes technology and
sure.
yeah, go ahead.
Great. And Brian, Derek, thanks so much for having me here. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I had been at IBM for 36 years and retired in 2015 and had seen this topic through three different lenses. I was a creator of technology, worked in the development lab, creating products for a bunch of my career. Operationally ran all of manufacturing for IBM, so I was a huge consumer of IT and the business value it needed to create. And then the end of my career, I owned all the IT applications that ran the company from the front end, sales, marketing, right through the back end, supply chain, ledger, all products, all brands, all geographies. So I got to see both sides of the coin there, the business side, the IT side, and then was recruited to be the interim chief information officer at Florida Blue, and there was sent to fix a number of problems, but most prominent, the heal the relationship between the business team and the technology team. Now, since then, I have served on a couple boards. I'm on Newvance Health and Peckham Industry boards, two prominent companies here in the Northeast, and do some consulting. And I will say in those board roles, I serve on the technology committee of both. So I see the same issue of delivering real business value with technology and how that's best done through yet another lens as a board member and a consultant. So happy to be here to talk about this topic.
Fantastic. Now, as you can see, we have a great group of guests today who will be providing us with actionable insight. So let's start the discussion off with a big question that we wanted to tackle today. The call for technology leaders to go beyond their traditional comfort zone and historical roots in technical details and subject matter expertise to also develop their business acumen and to cultivate their ability to serve as a trusted advisor to senior business leaders and organizations. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll say that the perception I've gotten over the years is that the business is from Mars and the IT team is from Venus. There just is a chasm. Every one of those entities I listed that I've worked for or worked with, I've seen this chasm. There's a gap. They speak two different languages, and it's very clear in my mind the language that you have to converge on is the language of the business. You've got to start and end your thinking and every conversation as a technology leader with what business problem am I trying to solve, not what technology am I trying to deliver. Now, I was blessed to have worked the lion's share of my career on the business side, so I had a natural empathy, a natural understanding of business operations. But if you don't naturally have that, you've got to get it to be a great technology leader in the modern era. You've got to be able to start by understanding the business issues uh, before you even think about what the solutions are.
Well, can I just
Excellent. Yeah,
jump in
Derek,
here? Yeah. I agree. There's a famous essay. I don't know if you've encountered it, Sal, but a guy named Charles Percy Snow, if I get his name right, CP Snow is what they usually call him, an English guy. He wrote it in the late 50s, actually, but it was called The Two Cultures. And if
Yeah.
you happen to glance through it in the audience, you'll find that he talks about these two groups that have no idea what the other one is saying, even though they try real hard. It's quite remarkable how that can be applied to traditional technology subject matter expert kind of roles that we were talking about on one side, and on the other side, the business leader. So my own experience has been that there is this gap, and but there's a transformation happening. I have seen the technical roles evolving, and that's a good thing. They're evolving to the they have the subject matter expert role. That's the traditional role. We can't live without that. We have to have that, but they're also developing skills to be kind of the business savvy technologist and be able to communicate in that business language, because that's what's necessary to make things happen. One other silly example, I'll show my age a bit here, but in the original Star Trek, Scotty, Montgomery Scott, the chief engineer on the Enterprise, he was comfortable down in the engine room on his back trying to get the dilithium crystals running again, but he was also on the bridge advising Captain Kirk on whatever their situation was and
Right.
strategy. So we need to be able to bridge that gap ourselves and speak the same language. So Sal, can I just on the topic of language, what in your experience what is that language that we should speak?
Yeah. So, Derek, I'll start with the thought of the business and the P&L. When I took that interim CIO assignment at Florida Blue, I certainly understood technology. I understood how technology supported a large enterprise. What I didn't know was healthcare as an industry. And so the very first thing I asked the president of Florida Blue to do was assign a coach that could walk me through and tutor me in days and weeks, not months, all the ins and outs of the P&L, the different segments, what their business challenges were. I wanted to start with an understanding of the P&L stresses that their businesses were under. And then from there, you're able to say, okay, what specific problems need to be solved? And then what technology solution can solve them? And there, for me, Derek, the common language is business cases. You've got to be able to say what the problem is, be able to quantify the benefits of implementing your solution, and then define the cost and the risks associated with it. You wouldn't buy a house unless somebody told you, here's what you're going to get, here are the specs, here are the materials, and here's how much it's going to cost. And so much as I frankly didn't like business cases when I started using them, I've come to become maybe the strongest proponent of using them as a common language.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And in my own work, I've found, I could tell you some of the roots of this, but we probably don't have time today. But sometimes technology business cases are challenging. I think today, vendors that we work with frequently have challenges. They're great at explaining the what and the how it works. And so, but what we're talking about here is the so what and the why it matters. Part
right.
of it. So I found, if this is helpful to the people listening, that there's kind of three high level buckets of business value. The first one is kind of the obvious one. You've already said it. Really, it's the enabling the business. What do they want to achieve? What are the business problems that need to be solved, and the strategic goals and objectives the business has, and how can we use technology to help with that? So I just call it enablement, but it's opportunity too. You could call it, in a way, you could call it risk too. I have to say, Sal, because these things aren't certain by any means, and that's what risk really is when there's uncertainty. But let's call it enablement or opportunities. The second bucket is maybe related, but for my work anyway, I just refer to it as operational efficiency. So it's about leveraging technology to save time or money, gain productivity, or achieve higher scale and scope of the things we're doing. So generally, that's in the cost savings bucket, and we really can talk about an ROI when we talk about that. But the third bucket, and I do a lot of this in my work at Aberdeen because I do a lot of work in cybersecurity, as we've said, and it's more of a traditional risk bucket, risk in the downside, not the upside risk we were talking about before. But Deloitte has a term, they call it unrewarded risk. So compliance would fall in there too. We prevent bad things from happening, or at least we manage the impact from bad things to an acceptable level. So That's really cost avoidance, though. That's, of course, not the same thing as cost savings. So you can't really talk about ROI when you talk about security. It's really more of a reduction in risk, or you'd say I'm buying down the risk to an acceptable level. So those are the three, buckets of value that I've found.
Yeah. I had very similar view. I added maybe a little more granularity, Derek, in my working days. The operational efficiency and productivity improvements come in two flavors. One is on the business side. People understand on the business if you're going to spend $800,000 to save $2 million a year by automating a process and saving labor on by automating. What they don't understand is when you want to spend X, Y, Z to replace a bunch of servers that don't directly deliver them any business value in a way they understand yet. You're doing it because the cost of running your data center or moving something to the cloud, the cost for you keeping the lights on is going to be lower, which is a benefit to the business, but it's your cost that you're taking out. So I refine that to be a couple buckets. And I will just say on the enabler side, similar, right? Delivering new products and services is a type of enablement. You're not saving any money. You're not improving operational efficiency. But as an example, when IBM started selling software as a service products years ago, we had only done distributed and entitled software. You just sell a license and you're done. Well, here you have to change the entire learn, shop, buy, and billing experience to pay by the drink. You have developers who want to play around in an IT sandbox and then hit the buy now button to buy the offer. Totally different experience had to be built out. The company couldn't even be in that market if the IT team hadn't built out that end-to-end experience. So love your framework. I added just a little granularity to it, but you're spot on.
Well, that's fine. I think we can still be friends here. And that's this whole session, research meets reality. I'm representing the research today, and you're representing the reality. So that's exactly why we want to have you in the conversation. Because the cool thing about being an analyst, we get to learn a lot about a lot of things. But I don't have responsibility for anything, and you have responsibility and have acted on that. So that's really great. If I could, maybe we change gears on that note. I was, we should talk about today the ways that technology leaders, like the roles you've had, can maximize and initially, but also sustain successfully over time the relevance of the function that we provide for the business. Is that the topic we can speak to for a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's great, Derek. If the first cornerstone in this structure you're building is an individual business case, your entire portfolio of work can be represented by an aggregation of business cases. So I think every good technology leader needs to recognize that they are a constrained, valuable resource within their company. Therefore, you need to have some form of I'm an old supply chain guy, a supply demand process to balance all the demands that are out there with the limited supply. So the next piece that I've worked on, Derek, is having this portfolio management supply demand process. A couple of key elements within it. First is to have a steering committee. You want to have a senior leader of every major business segment or shared service function represented on the steering committee so that collectively you can decide how to prioritize your capacity to produce the most value possible for the company and specifically what timings of which projects you want to do. Second thing that this allows you to do is with the business case methodology, you put all the like projects in the buckets as you described earlier, and then prioritize within them. So if my company's struggling for cash, guess what? I may maximize the bucket of projects which are operational efficiency and effectiveness. If I'm trying to create new markets and expand, I might minimize that bucket and maximize the enabling and the new go-to-market. It gives you a way as a team for you to see how to make the choices across the buckets, not just within each bucket.
Yeah, I think we can all probably relate that we can make a list of 99 things that we'd like to do, but then we only have time and resources to execute the top 10 or top 5 or whatever the case may be. So we got to make choices. And my term for that, I don't have the supply chain background you do, but I would just put that under the umbrella of governance. We need to have a process.
Absolutely.
That's it's the process for making business decisions like this. And the best, in Aberdeen's parlance, best in class approach to governance would be pretty much exactly the way you're talking about it. That'd be a mature kind of governance. And I may be exaggerating, but maybe not really either. The smaller companies, especially, governance is really Mike, the IT guy, is making decisions about how technology should be deployed and what the settings are. And Mike, the IT guy, does his best to do what he thinks is best practice and so on. Or maybe he just accepts what the vendors put as default in some of their configurations. But really, Mike, the IT doesn't own these decisions. Those are business decisions, and
Right.
so you do need some better process. It's sadly, we find in our research even to this day. One example, I think just recently I did a project on data governance, so a little more specific, but less than half of all the respondents had some kind of formal data governance process in place, and the others just didn't. Many of them said they planned to, but I feel I've learned over the years looking at surveys that it's like New Year's resolutions, that everybody has the intent to do things. Maybe the gyms are really busy in January, but then you look back the next year in the case of these intend to, and they didn't quite get to it. They didn't make the cut. So that's just how these things go.
Yeah, I'll bet every one of those companies has an analytics strategy, and ironically, only half of them have a data governance strategy. But Derek, you're absolutely right. The governance, I would put all of this under the banner of governance. One more thing I would say in terms of reality, the reality check, and I'm going to paint a very specific shade of gray here. The committee will determine the overall priority in this governance management system. However, somebody has to put the stalking horse out there and say, here's my cut at what a target priority would look like. What does everybody think? I found from my experience, if a technology leader sits back and waits for a committee of people to just come up with a priority, it never happens. So I've always favored the process of trying to define it as best as I think the CEO would want it done, and then let everybody throw rocks at it. That's a kind of a not written down rule that I always tried to follow.
Well, I think that's leadership is what that is. I teach a course outside of Aberdeen. I teach a graduate course at Harvard on security and risk and communicating risk. And I always say this, that our role is to advise and recommend. It's their job to decide, but we can help them. And here's another example, and it's similar to what you said. Senior leaders don't often know what their risk appetite or risk tolerance is. It's not for us to say, well, your risk tolerance is up to $10 million per year or whatever. Our job is to help them understand, and maybe we can foster the conversation. So again, we advise and recommend, but ultimately they have to decide. But it's easier to have a conversation that's not about a blank whiteboard. It's easier to say, hey, here's a stalking horse, and let's talk about that. Yeah, I agree with you. That's smart and good leadership. I wonder, Brian, we probably might be getting close on our time. These things are time limited, sadly. So maybe we can ask Sal.
All right, thank you. And it looks like we have a question from the audience here, if you guys don't mind. What are some of the steps that IT and tech leaders can take today to start making some of these changes in their organizations? Sal, I'm going to throw this one to you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think, Brian, three major steps. Number one, I tried to hire people that had some savvy for the business. You've got fingers on keyboards, programmers, that's one thing, but you have to have a few analysts in the organization that have a feel for the business and understand more than zero about it. So it starts with having a reasonable mix of people. The second thing is I've run a boot camp for my technology employees to indoctrinate them in the thoughts of what are all the business problems, what are the categories of projects, this whole idea of a supply-demand portfolio management. I made sure my entire leadership team was aware of it and understood as much about the business challenges and how we were solving them as I did as the leader. So some form of boot camp education to me was the second thing I focused on.
And the only thing I can think of to add, Sal and Brian, to that is that ultimately, and you've already said this, Sal, it is a people business very much, and so the relationships that we develop between the technology folks and the business folks are key. I've heard, and seen several companies have kind of embedded technologist type within the line of business functions, sort of be, the local presence, if you will, and representative and eyes and ears kind of thing. That's one of many approaches. But the bigger point is really it's about building those trusted relationships with people, so you can not only help understand what the business needs, but also have the trust that we need to be trusted advisors to the business.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Derek, I would add one other thought to that. Years ago, it was largely about understanding the business's challenges and what software you could develop or prepackaged software you could develop to solve those challenges. Now, with the advent of software as a service, often people on the business side of the ledger are reading up on these new technologies, and here's a new offering that solves exactly the CRM problem I have, or exactly the
Yeah,
marketing problem. And often they become more conversant on some of these new offerings than the technology team is. So it's
yeah,
important for you to stay abreast of all the offerings that are out there in the software as a service or business process as a service arena, because you're the one that's going to end up stitching it into your architecture ultimately.
yeah. This is a follow-up, maybe on the same original question, Sal, but um, to some extent, the business looks to the technologists to help tell them what they need and what the options are. It's kind of a
Right.
strategic, forward-looking skill set that I think the best leaders have. And it's related to your, hey, let's not have a blank, whiteboard. Let's bring something to them as a stalking horse. But it's also, what did Henry Ford say? We asked people, they would have said we need faster horses or more buggy whips. I don't know what he said, but you know what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to. Yeah. So sometimes they don't know what they need, and we can help
Yeah.
them see the possibilities. So where does that enter into all this in your experience?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I would have said 15 years ago, 90% of it was understanding the business problem and then creating or buying the technology. Now I bet that's only 60 or 70% of it. The other 30 or 40% is the art of the possible. What technology is out there? I'm on a health system. We're evaluating heart monitors that will replace the rounds that nurses have to do in the hospital because it's going to send the signal of everything you would care about: blood pressure, heart functions, you name it, temperature, to the central nurse station, and instantly alert people with AI software when there's a problem. So you're absolutely right. I'd say increasingly it's what's the art of the possible. The technology leader should be the person out there scanning the horizon, looking for not every shiny piece of tinfoil that's out there, but sifting them through and finding the ones that are really going to deliver value for your company.
Yeah, you've mentioned a couple that I have found is really important. One is just you're building teams. So you kind of talked about this already, but you talked about. I just boil it down to being a builder. You're building your teams. You're building capabilities. You're building the company, and you're building communities probably too. I imagine outside of the company even. So that's one. And then the strategic kind of forward-looking view. And I think one more that I found is. Uh, well, early on, you used the word heal, I think, didn't you, about an assignment that you had? And that's a big part of it too. Just the
Yeah.
whole ability to communicate and sometimes, you do have to make bridges and heal and bring people together. So I think you listed a lot of things that are. It's all rolled up on another guy I've read, and I've kind of adapted a guy named Larry Spears, but he called it servant leadership. So what you described, so really, to me, is very much what's the definition of a servant leader. I don't know if you know that phrase or not, but it's very consistent with what you have said.
Derek, I will say the term blossomed into popularity after I retired from full-time work, but looking back at it, that's exactly the way I tried to lead.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
certainly the way I teach a leadership class as well. And it's certainly a philosophy that I strongly believe in.
yeah, yeah. Excellent. Brian, was that the only question we had today or so far? Oops. Oh, we lost Brian. Oops, Sal.
Yeah, can't.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So thank you, Derek and Sal. Yeah, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you for, Derek and Sal being our guests and being such fantastic speakers with such, great insight that you've shared with this audience. And thank you for joining us today, all of you out there. We'll be hosting more episodes like this in the near future, where we highly encourage you to follow our page to receive the latest updates on future episodes, research findings, and more. So thanks again for tuning in, and thanks again to Sal and Derek for joining us today. Have a great one.
All right. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Everyone.